bit about 1984. It's the first big long work I do, and what I realized was, as I got to page 104 and finished reading the first section, was that it was just going to be too much to try to do the whole book as one. So I'm going to do the first part. And I think I'm going to kind of combine telling of the story and the food. So the food I'm doing is gin. I can't make gin. Even if I could make gin, I'm not going to make gin. So it's going to be more, when I look at the food, it'll be more like, what the heck is gin? And I don't want to go too much on the assumption that people know the book, but I also don't want to go too much on the assumption that people don't know the book. So I'm just going to do kind of like a brief overview. The book follows the main character, Winston Smith, and he is a member of the party. There are two separate groups, the people who are members of the party, and then the people called proles, which is short for proletariat. So they're like the proletariat's the worker people, though everybody works. It's just that the party people have more an intellectual job, whereas the proles have more of a hands-on type job or a manual labor type job. And the whole world, it's set in London in 1984, but it's supposed to be the future. So when it was written, 1984 was the future. There's constant war with either one of two groups. So London, or whatever it's called, is either at war with Eurasia or allied with Eurasia, and it switches. And the big thing is that reality is totally controlled, so that the past is constantly being rewritten so that everything that it's claimed is true. And there's a whole new language, there's a way of thinking, and Big Brother, who's supposed to be the kind of like the political secular god, the very unfriendly Santa Claus who's always watching you and knows what you're thinking, is this overriding image. And even your thoughts can be criminalized. So there is a thought police type thing, and people are constantly watched. I mean, it's very funny reading this, because some of the things that are said as torturous or things we do to ourselves on purpose, like the fact that there's always a screen on and somebody can always see you, and you can never turn noise off, you can never be quiet with your thoughts. And it makes me think of even pumping gas, where the screen comes on and I've got a barrage of commercials at me and I just want quiet. I'm just pumping gas. Can you leave me alone? So there's very interesting aspects of our world that we do willingly to ourselves in 1984. Very creepy. That's another thing. I'm reading the book thinking about, and it is rich with motifs and symbolism, just rich with them. So I'm only, like, there's a lot of animal imagery. There's a lot of, we'll just go with, body parts, eyes, a lot of things with eyes and glasses, and vision and seeing and screens. But I am focusing on the kind of the places, gin, and where places are serve gin and food. The world itself is described, and I say the world, and I mean the world that Winston lives in, not the world as a whole. We don't get a glimpse of the world outside of Winston's world. He has to kind of imagine it, and he's constantly gripping for memories of the past, because there's nothing to confirm it, because everything once changed is destroyed. Everything once changed is destroyed. And he sees the evidence, because he's one of the people who rewrites stuff. But as soon as he rewrites it, he has to burn the thing that said the quota was this, but then they changed the quota, so they have to get rid of what the old quota was, because it's got to be correct. It's such a weird thing to read and think of. It's large scale gaslighting. You might be a lunatic, but you can't check because you can't ask people, look, did you notice this weirdness? Because if you do, then you get arrested. You can't even, like, he's constantly trying to control his expressions. The world that Winston lives in is colorless, expressionless, as in, they have things like the 20, not the 20 minute, but how long is it? 2-minute hate or something, 10-minute hate, where they go and they scream and they yell. So there's a lot of that expression. And they have public executions, so there's a lot of expression, but it's not, it's like geared up expression. Like you have to express things this way at this time because it's appropriate, not you can express what your actual inner feelings and thoughts are. That has to be controlled. So appropriate expression now. Internal authentic expression, never. Totally dangerous, life-threatening. So it's expressionless, it's dirty, it's grimy, it's dusty, it's oily, it's greasy. If it has an odor, it's a smelly odor. It's often the smell of stagnant water or boiled cabbage or sewage. So that colorless, expressionless, icky. And a lot of things are greasy. Gin itself is described as greasy and oily. And a bar or like a social media cocktail, they're very attractive. They're pretty, they look light, they look refreshing. This does not at all sound light or refreshing. And it's first ever mentioned like on page 5. So the gin comes right in. We're in with the gin. He, meaning Winston, took down from the shelf a bottle of colorless, and yes, gin is clear, and I'm going to say that this is Winston at his house or his flat during a work lunch period. So he's going to have some gin. A bottle of colorless liquid with a plain white label marked Victory Gin. It gave off a sickly, oily smell, as of Chinese rice spirit. And Winston poured out nearly a teacupful, nerved himself for a shock, and gulped it down like a dose of medicine. ... A little while later. The next moment, however, the burning in his belly died down and the world began to look more cheerful. And okay, so that's the end quote. That's not unusual for liquor. It burns, it makes things look cheerful sometimes, maybe it makes it look worse. And I start to ask questions. One, why is it so greasy? Think about that. Like, why does it seem so unappealing? Why is he encouraged to drink it at lunch for work? Because it's not just when he goes home and nobody can see him. It's in the cafeteria at lunch, they don't call it the canteen, they might call it, where they just go and they pay a little extra and they get their gulp of Victory Gin during lunch. I wondered, is it doctored in any way? Because later on, it's called synthetic. And it says nothing cheap and plentiful except synthetic gin. So what are they making gin out of? And what are they putting in gin? And what is it made of? Another part that gin is mentioned is in the Chestnut Tree Cafe. Now, this is the past, and like I said, Winston is constantly trying to grip, are things actually better now? We keep being told things are better, and boots are more plentiful, and chocolate, we have more chocolate, and all this stuff. And there's a big section of everybody trying, not everybody, but several people trying to find razors. So they talk about the plentifulness, but you can't find a razor. I haven't had a razor for 6 months or whatever it is. So there's contradictions, but people don't question it. But the Chestnut Tree Cafe, he's thinking of, I believe it still exists, but this is in the past. There were 3 enemies I'm going to call them enemies of the state. That's not what they call them. There were 3 traitors to Big Brother, Rutherford, Aronson, and Jones. And he saw them after they had been tried and taken and tortured. It's like they take their criminals out and they parade them out so people can see how broken they are, and then they eventually grasp them again and kill them. So they're being trotted out and placed in. Nobody sits around them. They're shunned because you don't want to be associated with them, because you don't want to get taken off to the Ministry of Love, which is what it's called, but it's really a torture building. And they were at the Chestnut Tree Cafe drinking, quote, gin flavored with cloves, which was the specialty of the cafe. Now that actually sounds kind of good. I love cloves. That doesn't sound bad. But how can a cafe have a specialty if everything is the same? So in the past, the cafe had a specialty. Does it still have a specialty? I don't know yet. And here they were drinking something that doesn't sound so terrible. But the whole images are terrible. So that's the main gin part. Oh, he does go into a bar with a prole, with a guy. He wants to ask, the man's older, and he wants to ask him questions about the past. The interesting thing to me about this conversation that Winston has is the man gives him information, but it's not worded the way Winston wants it, so he misses it. He misses all the subtlety of the information he's being given and thinks that the man is totally useless and addle-brained. But if he'd listened, he could have heard contradictions to what he had been told. So that conversation's always been interesting to me. Okay, so what was I going to say? Oh, the proles drink beer. They can get gin, but they're not really encouraged or supposed to drink it. That's pleasurable in life is squeezed of its pleasure. Even he describes sex as you could go. There's prostitution with the proles, and it's not really, you're not supposed to do it, but you could, but that's not enjoyable. He was married, and the whole purpose was to beget children, so that sex was not pleasurable. And he describes it as getting it like getting an enema. Okay, well, the food doesn't taste good. There's no love in relationships. There's no real friendship bonds. You're not supposed to have friends. You have comrades, not friends. So there's no pleasure, and he is searching for some sort of indication that what he is living with is actually what it says it is, which is better than what the past was. And he has no evidence because they constantly destroy evidence and rewrite the history in the past. So, and really the history in the past could be that day. Like tomorrow, we're going to rewrite what happened yesterday, and you'll have no evidence because they collect all the books and everything. And he says the only evidence he has is this internal screaming that this can't be good. This can't be how life is meant to be lived. So that's what's going on, and we're in part one. We're being set up and Winston is being set up for his big transgression, and the gin is right there with him. And like I said, I have questions. Does the Chestnut Tree Cafe, when it comes up later, do they still sell gin flavored with cloves? And if so, why wouldn't people go drink it instead of the nasty stuff that just sounds like you belt it down because you gotta, just to make it through life? Okay, it's very hard to put on a happy face. And also I know where this book is going, and it does not go in a happy area. No, it does not. So that is part one of 1984, and I'll come back with part two.